Morning, everyone. I'd like to talk about one of these topics that comes up every so often, or quite often, which is the role of agile in architecture. We often hear that we need an architecture that enables us to be agile. But is this true? And if it is true, why is it true? So I'd like to take a step back and start looking at the kind of systems we work in to understand why it might be true. So things start with teams in the organization. What are those teams looking for? They're looking for signals from the market. What should we build? What should we develop? How should we improve our products? What's the market looking for? The market expects a great customer experience, products that satisfy their needs, give them new abilities, and also provide a great experience. A great customer experience is not just something that looks well, it has the features they need. What enables a great customer experience? Software architecture. And who builds the software architecture? The engineering teams. So what we can tell from this cycle is, if we want to satisfy the market and produce a great customer experience, we need a software architecture that enables us to do that. We need the optimal software architecture. What do we need to build the optimal software architecture? We need the teams building the architecture organized in the right way. So if we want to build better products faster, we need both our architecture optimized and the structure of our teams optimized. But there's more, two more things about this. We know from concepts like Conway's law that the teams and the architecture are almost always aligned. What else do we know? We know that the software architecture is a model of the domain. Wow, that's why we're here today, because everything we do revolves around the domain. But I'm not the first person to make this observation. It's quite a common idea. If you want to build products faster, you need an architecture that enables you to evolve your product as your domain evolves, as your business requirements change. And it's not just anecdotes either. We have surveys and research now. And the DevOps surveys, they found that a loosely coupled software architecture and an organizational structure to match is one of the biggest predictors of continuous delivery performance. And it also provides us with the ability to scale up our organization and scale productivity linearly. Normally what happens is we add more people to a project, we get less and less payback each time. With a well-architected software system and an organizational structure to match, aligned with the domain, we get these two powerful benefits. ThoughtWorks, in their studies, they found something very similar. When a piece of work leaves the team, when multiple teams must collaborate on a piece of work, it takes orders of magnitude longer to complete that piece of work. So what I want to show you today is that these 5 elements, these 5 actors or elements of socio-technical systems, these are all interrelated, and these are all part of domain-driven design. If we look at different aspects of domain-driven design, it's all about understanding the relationships between these components in socio-technical systems. I'm going to talk about a few topics today. I'm going to look at the cost of dependencies, some heuristics for designing boundaries, and also taking a step back to look at large-scale design, looking at teams of teams, groups of bounded context, all that kind of fancy stuff. So let's start by taking a look at the costs of coupling in these kinds of socio-technical systems. What happens when we introduce dependencies between architectural components and teams? From a fundamental level, this is one of the biggest challenges in any kind of system. Where do we draw the boundaries? Because where we draw the boundaries is not just about boundaries, it's about dependencies. Where we choose to put those boundaries is where we choose to introduce dependencies. So let's take a look at some of this. So the domain I'm going to demonstrate this with is luxury holidays, a company that provides luxury holidays. Now they notice in their organization there are many teams that are all duplicating the same functionality. There are many teams who've all built their own email sending service. They've all got their own email template builder, their own email sender. And there's an architect in the organization, and he hates duplication. He looks at this, he just cannot bear what he's seeing. We've got so many duplicated email sending services. I'm not happy with this. We need one only. Is this a good architectural decision? Yes or no? Who says yes? Who says no? It's not important if it's a good or bad decision. The important thing here is, how do we know if it's a good or bad decision? How do we judge in our context if this is a good or bad decision? I'll now give you the answer. So the first criteria is, when we introduce a dependency like this, let's look at the customer experience level. Have we broken anything or changed anything from a customer's perspective? In this case, no. Even though these teams now have to depend on another service, they haven't lost their ability to do anything they had before. So far, it's a good decision. What next? In fact, because they don't have to worry about all of this email sending logic that was slowing them down, they can now focus on the core areas of their products. Still seems like a good decision to me. Is there a twist in the story? Maybe not. So even though there's a dependency between these teams, they're not actually being slowed down, because each of the consumers of this shared service is not changing their products in a way that requires the shared service to change. So even though there's a dependency here, there's no cost of this dependency so far. And actually, from a business perspective, this duplication has removed waste in the organization. So in this case, it was a good decision. But just to caveat things, you might have a very similar situation in your organization, and it might be a bad decision. Let's look at another example. So in this organization, there are actually two main parts of the business. One part of the business deals with luxury holidays, and another part of the company deals with mass market holidays. But this architect comes along, and he's having another bad day. He's seeing duplication again. Both of these departments have their own package builder. He says, I'm not having it. I'm not happy with this. We're going to have one for the whole company. Is this a good or a bad architectural decision? Who says good? Who says bad? Okay, so you were wrong before, but you're sticking with bad, okay? Let's look at the criteria. It's not about the decision, it's about the criteria we use. So I'm just going to have a drink and let that sit there for a minute. Has anyone changed their mind yet? So we're going with a bad decision. But why? In this case, they have lost their capabilities. The luxury experiences team, they're now using this shared package builder, and they've lost features they had before. Their product is now worse. So far, it's looking like a bad decision. Now they're being slowed down by this dependency, because they were constantly improving their package builder. And now to make improvements to that part of their product, it's a feature request to another team who also have feature requests from many other teams. Looking like a real bad decision here. As a consequence, we now have political battles in the organization. Not a good thing unless you like political battles. So in this case, this perception of duplication was actually false. These things look the same, but they weren't the same. But why? If we take a DDD mindset, why was this a bad decision? And how could DDD have helped us to make this decision better? So in the luxury experiences part of the organization, this package builder is their core domain. It's the core part of their product. And now we've taken that core part of their product, which they need to evolve more than any other part of their product, and we've outsourced it to another team. We've put a dependency there. We've slowed them down, improving their core domain. That's a real bad decision there. Now, for the mass markets department, the package builder wasn't a core part of their domain, so they don't mind about this dependency. So it looks the same, but it's not the same. So I've got a checklist I'd like to share with you, which touches on each of these 5 elements of socio-technical systems, and it helps you to just make sure you're thinking about each aspect of dependencies you're introducing. So the first one is, by introducing a shared dependency, will the consumers lose anything they currently have? Are we taking something away from them? If yes, let's take a second thought here. It might be a bad decision. On the other hand, by introducing a shared service or a dependency, can we give the consumer something they didn't have before? If yes, maybe it's a good decision. And if we introduce a shared dependency, are we taking something away from teams which is not core to their product, which is slowing them down, and we're giving them more time to add value on parts of their product where there's more payback for the business? Then we need to ask ourselves, will this dependency slow the teams down? We often see conflicting extremes. Dependencies are bad, dependencies are good. Actually, what's the cost of the dependency in terms of slowing teams down? And secondly, by introducing this dependency, will the team building the shared service, will they be responsive when the team that depends on them need help or there are problems in production? We also need to look at the number of consumers because it's a balancing act. If we have a shared service with, let's say, 20 consumers, from a business perspective, that's very effective, efficient in terms of economies of scale. We've got one thing used by many teams. On the other hand, if we've got 20 teams and they all need this shared service to evolve for different reasons, that's going to be very difficult for many teams and probably very political. What else do we need to look at? Cost of migration. I've worked with organizations and they've built these shared services which were amazing, but the cost of existing teams moving from what they had to the new shared service was so high that no one actually used the shared service. And that leads us to the next one. Can the consumers refuse to migrate to the new service? If yes, let's be very careful before we start building some amazingly gold-plated service. And I think the important question to ask is, whenever we see something that looks the same, let's ask ourselves, is it really the same? Is it really duplication at a business level, or does it just look like duplication? So that was a quick look at the kinds of dependencies and the cost of dependencies and how we might work out if we want to have dependencies or not. How do we start using heuristics to design the boundaries in our system and where those dependencies may lie? So one of the heuristics I like to use here is to think about all of the different people affected by the system we're building. Just ask yourself the question, if I were to build the architecture for that person or that group of people, what would the optimal architecture look like? So let's take this example from the classified ads domain. So in the States, we have this website called Craigslist.org for classifieds. We can see here they do a bunch of different things, buying and selling goods, real estate, jobs. How might we design a software system in a domain like this? By looking at the perspective of different actors or stakeholders in this system. On the one hand, we have two different kinds of user. We have people who want to list their services or goods, and people who are seeking services or goods. We might decide we want to split the system this way. We can design an optimal user experience for each of those groups of people. But we could also look at the system from more granular customer segments. We might have antiques, jobs, and services, each as their own independent contexts, which can be optimized for different kinds of user. Because a classified ad for selling antiques might look very different to an ad for selling jobs. You might want different fields and options on there. So by separating these things, we can give each market niche a unique, tailored experience. But now we get back to a situation where we might have some duplication in each of those contexts. We might also want to look at this perspective of regional managers. Like in different countries, the way we advertise jobs might be different. We might want to give each different region the ability to customize things to their needs. Or we might take a look at the system from the perspective of the sales team. We might have a B2B sales and B2C sales, and they want very different products and features. So they might want separate architectural components there. We also need to look at the perspective of the development teams. What's best for them? Do we want one highly generic code base with lots of ifs and flags and features switches, or do we want small components which are focused, but there are more dependencies between them? Maybe we should look at the CEO's perspective. From their perspective, there are only these 3 parts of the business that really matter. So let's isolate those and decouple it from all of the other parts of the system that don't really contribute to the company's revenue. Well, how about the CFO's perspective? Why don't we just outsource the whole thing? Give them some peanuts and we'll get some rubbish code out of it. But I'm joking here. But the CFO's perspective is still useful. You know, are we spending money in an efficient way? Could we outsource some bits of the system? So my advice here is, honestly, constantly ask yourself the question, who are we optimizing our architecture for? Which stakeholders inside the company? Which customer segments outside the company? And to answer these kind of questions, you need to connect your architectural decisions back to your business model. If you don't know the business model, it's very difficult to make the best architectural decisions. And again, this is where domain-driven design comes in. So domain-driven design encourages us to align our architecture or to isolate parts of the system which provide differing levels of value to the business. So one technique you can use is to learn the business model canvas. This can help you get a perspective of which customer segments or which aspects of the system provide the most value to the business. Maybe we should start optimizing our architecture for these parts at the expense of some others. And this is where the concept of core, supporting, and generic domains comes in from domain-driven design. This is why DDD people are always talking about, where's the core domain? Let's try and find the core domain. Let's optimize the core domain. It can be a bit obsessive at times, but there is a point here. We're trying to find those key parts of the system. So in this example, maybe for that classified ads company, maybe 80% of their revenue comes from jobs. So jobs is their core domain. Let's isolate jobs so we can innovate here, and let's compromise other parts of the system. And also, we need to understand the effects on the people building the software architecture in terms of the social impacts and the political impacts. Because very often, you'll see a software architecture, you'll see some interesting architectural choices and complexity that doesn't need to be there. And often, this complexity is because of politics or organizational dysfunctions where people are trying to architect their way around them. So let's imagine we have these 2 departments in an organization. One department is responsible for the website, and they depend on a bunch of APIs which are built by a different team. Over time, some problems start to emerge. The website is slow, but the department A who build the website, they're not responsible for this because the APIs are slow. They've inherited this slow problem. The website's unreliable because the APIs are unreliable. That's another problem they've inherited. They're frequently blocked adding new features because they depend on the APIs to add new improvements to the APIs. That's another problem they've inherited. Their rate of innovation is slow. They've got a lot of angry customers complaining about the website lacking features, being slow, and being unreliable. And who gets the blame for all this? Department A. People see a slow website. People see an unreliable website. People see a website lacking features. And they assume it's Department A. They assume it's the website team who are having all of the issues. And so this starts to create conflicts in the organization. Department A gets the blame, they blame Department B, and it becomes a deep battle. So Department A, they're accountable for providing a great website experience, but they're not responsible for making that happen. And these dysfunctions in the organization start to appear. So what they decide to do is to introduce an accountability protection buffer. And what this means is they want to create some component in their architecture which enables them to be responsible for providing a great website experience. So what they do is they build this importer which runs overnight. Every night, talks to all of these APIs, imports the data, and now they have all of the data stored locally. And at first, this seems to work really well. The website's fast, it's reliable, and they can add new features fairly often. But soon, other problems start to emerge. Information on the website is out of date, because this importer only runs on a periodic basis, like once a day. Information on the website is now out of date. Missing inventory, products are not appearing on the website because there are errors in this importer and these products just don't appear on the website. There are inconsistencies between systems. Internal systems are saying one thing, the website saying another thing, and it's causing lots of confusion in the organization. And there was a big investment to build this importer. They spent a lot of time building it. And there's a big maintenance cost associated with it as well. And now, when they're trying to improve the website, they're not able to benefit from features added to these back-end APIs. So ask yourself, when you see situations like this, are you trying to architect around dysfunctions in the organization? Are you avoiding talking to people, discussing issues, and trying to solve it in architecture? And actually, are you making your architecture more complex as a result and snowballing the organizational dysfunctions? I bet if you go in many organizations, you'll see things like this, like, why did we do that in the code? Why is there this complicated piece? Because there was some dysfunction in the organization, usually mismatched incentives, personal goals, deep-seated conflicts between different teams. Anyway, getting back to the topic of domain-driven design, and something Eric talked about yesterday evening, in DDD we have these different patterns, these relationship patterns, which describe the socio-technical integration between different contexts. How do we integrate bounded context on a technical level? And how do we get those teams? What's the relationship between the teams? And I think there is so much opportunity to look at this area of how we integrate both the technical aspects and the teams. I think there are many new patterns and insights here that we can benefit from exploring. Anyway, time to switch topic now. Time to step back a layer and look at systems from a different perspective. And I think it's super important to be able to understand a system from different levels of abstraction. By looking at the system a layer above the one you're working at and a layer below the level you're working at, you're able to put your decisions, the parts of the system you're working on, into a different context and get a different frame for analysis. And so there's this whole part of the DDD book called large-scale structure. And if I'm honest with you, I don't really see any talks or blog posts or really anyone discussing this aspect of DDD. So I think it's another area of opportunity for exploration. So let's jump into the domain of grocery shopping, because everyone loves shopping. So this is an organization, it's a big supermarket. They've been going for decades, 50, 60 years. And they start off in the 60s or 70s, technology comes along, mainframes, and they introduce technology to improve and increase the efficiency of their business workflows. So they set up an IT department which builds software systems for managing their physical stores, inventory, warehousing, all that kind of stuff. A few decades later, the internet comes along, and they decide, we're going to need to start again. All of that old IT infrastructure and software is so old and out of date, it won't allow us to capitalize on the internet opportunity. We need a fresh start with new IT systems. And it works. By starting from fresh, they're able to get an advantage in the internet era. And then mobile phones come along, and they're like, that old IT infrastructure we use for the website, it's so old and out of date, we need something that enables us to move quicker. We need a whole new IT department and whole new IT teams for our mobile experience. We need to get ahead of the competition in the mobile era. Big opportunities here. And then they decide to open a bank. Oh, we can't use the mobile infrastructure. That's so old and out of date. We need new IT systems and new teams building our bank IT. And all of these decisions are really good decisions because they enable them to start moving with new products very quickly and make progress very quickly, stay competitive in the market, until customers start getting annoyed. Why do I have 4 separate logins for all different systems? I'm one customer, you're one company, why 4 logins? Driving me crazy. And actually, why I'm complaining, why is it when I purchase things in the store, I can't see them on my phone? When I purchase things on my phone, I can't see them on the desktop. What is going on here? I'm one customer, you're one company, these experiences are driving me crazy. And actually, why is it when I spend money in your store and I get loyalty points, I can't use those loyalty points on my phone? What is going on here? I'm one customer, you're one company, driving me crazy. So the company decides we need to switch. We need to switch how we work because we have this duplication. Inside each of our IT silos, we have an identity service, an order service, and a loyalty service. It's duplication and it's waste, and it's resulting in a very bad customer experience. So we're going to switch to being more capability aligned. We'll have an identity team, an orders team and service, and a loyalty system and service. We'll have one of each capability and no more duplication. Is this a good or a bad thing? We'll answer that shortly. But one of the interesting things about when you start seeing companies at higher scale, one of the patterns we're seeing nowadays, is kind of like the ecosystem organization. So organizations typically have some kind of API platform, and they have separate experiences for web and mobile. It's a very interesting pattern. Just wanted to mention that. I'm not talking about this too much today. But going back to this main topic, what are the pros and cons of being more product aligned versus capability aligned? If we go product aligned, each product can be optimized. The user experience of each product, web, mobile, etc., can be optimized. However, if we go capability aligned, we can provide a more seamless user experience across our products, but we might compromise the UX of each individual product. It's a difficult balancing act there. If anyone's built identity systems, you probably know what I'm talking about. If we go product aligned, we can innovate each product very quickly. However, each product may look different, whereas if we go capability aligned, we can innovate on the business model much more quickly. We have all of these APIs we can reuse in new shapes and flavors. If we go product aligned, we have less coordination across teams. When we start switching to this capability aligned model, for any piece of work, it's going to cut through a product to many capabilities. Trying to organize and align those different teams at a program level can be very challenging. And it comes back to how organizations are financed and how budgeting works. When we have the product aligned model, each product has its own profit and loss. When we go to the capability aligned model, we now have a bunch of capabilities, and individually they don't have a profit and loss. They're like cost centers, and it becomes very difficult to equate, to align what's the value of adding these features when we don't have a direct return on investment. So these capabilities become perceived cost centers, and if you're working in a capability, it becomes very difficult as a team to judge for people to judge your impact in the organization, because you're not making a profit. How can people judge how well you're doing? So it becomes very challenging from that perspective. So my advice is, and you might hate me for advising this, but if you're not aware how financing and budgeting works in the organizations you're working in, just have a little peek, just move the covers, have a look in there, see how it works, because actually a lot of the decisions you're making about architecture are connected to the budget. And sometimes you might have great ideas about improving your product or the way you shape teams in your software, but actually it kind of clashes with your organization's financing model. And also, we apply these domain-driven design concepts at the level of microservices, but actually, these concepts can also apply at higher levels of a system at more of a program level or more of an enterprise level. So it might be that we decide, let's have one identity service, let's have 3 orders service, and let's have 2 loyalty services. Let's understand the domain, let's apply all these DDD concepts at a much higher level. And one of the concepts I come across a lot is that people think if you want all of the data about a specific thing in one place, you need to have one service or one context that owns the data. So actually, we don't need a single orders context to be able to provide our users with a unified view of their orders. You can join data in the web layer or in a data warehouse layer. I'm sure most people know this, but it's a conversation I have quite a lot. Anyway, final topic. So one of the things I think me and other people in the community might be a bit guilty of is talking about boundaries a lot. Now, if we just find the perfect architecture, if we just put those boundaries in the right place, everything will be perfect. Unfortunately, that's only really half of the story. The connections between our boundaries are important, and the fluidity as things change is important over time. And we need to pay, I think, more attention here. So what can often happen is you design the new system, and for the first few months or features, it looks perfect. Each team only has to make changes to their product, and there are no requirements cutting across multiple teams. But, oh, we've got perfect boundaries. We did our design perfectly. The architecture is perfect. And then you work on the next set of features, and it's like, oh my God, every feature is cutting across multiple teams. What do we do here? We're not prepared for this. And this is the kind of situation where the politics arise, where we get into this situation of thinking, if we just design perfect boundaries, everything will be okay. But it won't be okay. So firstly, I think it's important to have this attitude that your boundaries won't be right first time, and they might never be right. We should always be looking at different ways to improve our boundaries, evolve them over time. And for this to be successful, we need to make people affected by the boundaries stakeholders in the decision. If people feel like they've contributed to the current design of the boundaries, when the boundaries are wrong, people will be comfortable saying, look, I was part of the team that designed this system. I now think the design might be wrong. I'm happy to evolve it. And so I think also building fluidity into the culture, preparing for change, finding ways to evolve the system over time is an area which I see lacking. I really do see this culture so much. Let's just design the perfect boundaries and everything will be okay. So one thing we can look at is, how do we evolve the system over time? How do we change the structure? How do we take 3 components and make them into 2 or 4? And there are a bunch of different patterns here. And this is another area where I think there's so much opportunity for exploration. What are the kind of evolutionary patterns we can apply to domains over time to merge from one system structure to another? What are the kind of slice and scale patterns like this, for example? And also, team boundaries or organization is different to boundaries in software. We have the opportunity to provide much more fluidity in the organization than we do in software. Moving bits of software between different services and bounded context is a high cost. Moving a person from one team to another to spread the knowledge is actually not such a high cost. So one of these patterns I'm seeing now, and I'm seeing it working really well in some companies, is this idea of semi-fluid subteams. So we have a bunch of teams working together in an area. And I would call this like a super context, a bunch of bounded context which are related. We find these parts of the domain which are related, these super contexts. And the teams working in those closely related parts of the domain, in each team, there's 1 or 2 people who stay fixed in the team. But then on a frequent basis, typically once a month I've seen, one person rotates from each team into another team. There are lots of caveats here, but this enables the team to be fluid according to the work. So if sub-team 1 is blocked by subteam 2, subteam 1 can create a pull request in subteam 2's code. Now, if you've not worked in subteam 2 before, the cost of creating a pull request is high. You don't understand their code base. You don't understand their domain. And the effort to create that pull request is high. If half of your team have worked in subteam 2, what's the cost of creating that pull request? It's low. So this kind of fluidity can provide a number of benefits on a technical level and also transferring domain knowledge. And there are different variations on the pattern, such as loaning people to different teams for like a week or something. And again, this is another area where I think there's a lot of opportunity for exploration, especially in the context of DDD. There is one book on this topic which is called Dynamic Reteaming, which is definitely a good read. So let's have a final takeaway for you. I think if you agree that the systems we're working in are socio-technical, and it's not just about the technology we're working with, I think there are really 5 areas to focus on. And whenever you're making decisions, you should always be thinking about, am I thinking about the domain here? How does the domain work? Am I thinking about the value here? Are my choices aligning with the business model? Am I thinking about the social and the political impact of my choices here? Am I thinking about technology as well? I'm pretty sure you are. And also, what's the impact of the customer experience of this change I'm making? Very often, we can be working in back-end systems, making changes to APIs and bounded contexts. And we're very disconnected from the customer experience. But the changes we're making all the way back down there in the bounded context and the database can impact the customer experience in profound ways. For example, the way we shape our boundaries determines which data gets updated in database transactions. And that can lead to eventual consistency at the user experience level. And there are many situations where we can change things in the back end which can have an impact at the customer experience level which we're not aware of. Anyway, I'm finished now. Thank you very much. Thanks. Are we doing questions here, or?
We have 7 minutes for questions.
Okay. Anyone have any questions?
Do you have any thoughts or experience around the architecture, sociotechnical architecture feeding back into the financing model?
So how would the socio-technical architecture feed back into the financing model? Are we talking about... Do you have an example, something more specific?
I'm just curious. You talked a lot about the mutual sort of change that both have on each other, and I'm just curious if that's, the financing model is just kind of static and just can never be helped by the architecture of a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah. So this is actually one of the areas I've been looking at a lot over the past 6 or 7 months. As I've started to work with different companies, we keep coming into this issue of finance. The typical example is moving to capabilities that I talked about. Companies want to go to these capabilities, but there's no profit and loss anymore, and it's hard to correlate the benefits of investing in a capability. How does that contribute on a product level? I think there are certain metrics that can be used. So, for example, cost to serve is one metric. Like, how much does it cost us to serve one customer? And by looking for that metric, you have to understand when a request comes in for this customer, which of our services are touched by that customer and how much does each request cost? So I think, yeah, cost to serve can help. It's really about understanding the different flows, which components are involved and how much each request costs. And I think we might be seeing some opportunities here with serverless, where we get the actual cost in compute units of each request. Maybe that's something, but yeah, I'd say I don't have a great answer. I'm looking into beyond budgeting, but it's an issue I come across a lot, actually. So maybe if you have some discoveries, you can share them with me, please. Any other questions? Hey.
Thank you. I have a question about your interesting example that people can change teams. And for me, it's not clear because if we are talking about domain, then there should be domain knowledge, and you can be expert in some domain only if you work for a while there, right? And I work in fintech, and for example, we have payments domain, card payments, very complicated stuff, and we have credit domain and other complicated stuff, right? And for me, the question is, if I will be moving between those teams, do you think I will grasp these domains? Do you think I will become expert anyway?
I think there's certainly a conversation there, like which heuristics do we use to decide if this rotation can work or not? I think in the example I gave, the teams were all working in a very similar area, like 4 bounded contexts, which were very closely related. In this example, you're using like credits and payments. Maybe the concepts are so different, and actually you need to spend 6 months here before you can actually understand it. So maybe in that case, it couldn't work. So I guess in that case, it would be experimentation. Maybe try it for a couple of people for a couple of months, see what happens, iterate from there. But I would say it's worth a try, even if it sounds like it couldn't work. Just give it a try, see what happens. Any more questions?
This is maybe one comment to your example with in the beginning with shared email service, and you said the architect decides and it may be a good idea. My question is, if I'm the owner of one of those groups and the company decides to provide that email service, why wouldn't I be happy to use it? Why do I need an architect to tell me I have to use it? Because that was the reason why I raised my hand. It's not a good idea.
If you're building a service from scratch and you need email sending ability, and you have an email sending service, great, let's just use it and move on to what we care about. If you're working in like a big organization and each of those teams has developed their own way of sending emails, the cost of migrating from what they have now to this new service could mean 3 or 4 months of work. So that's when it becomes, I'd say the cost of migration is the issue there. The other one might be if each team is actually improving that capability and they're making changes on a weekly or on a frequent basis, to now have to send a feature request to another team to implement something for them, and it slows them down from improving what's core to them, that will be another reason not to.
My comment was more in terms of, should it not rather be a bottom-up decision to migrate than a top-down decision? I guess it depends on the context, but... So
decision-making and who makes the decisions, yeah, different models out there, from dictatorships to bureaucracies. I guess in an ideal world, everyone would have an opportunity to have their say, and everyone would agree on the correct solution going forward. Normally, that doesn't work out quite so well. So, but I would certainly try the self-organizing approach. If people can agree amongst themselves, it saves someone having to make a difficult decision.
Thanks.
One last one, and then we're out of time.
So I've been looking into the same area based on what I do as an engineer and as well as my second education as in business. So my question is that in your experience working with different companies, have you been successful working together with the teams like in the companies that do business strategy, because you focus on the business model, which is the right thing, as well as the management consultants, for example, who come up and basically come up with these business models, innovations and stuff like that, and how you were able to, if you were successful or at least partially successful, were you able to, how you did get up to the same table to have these discussions? Because typically in companies there's a role about like chief innovation officer, CTO, who is responsible for doing these things, but he's one person, maybe a small group of under him. And software architects are typically people in the field who are actually doing the work. but in fact, you need to have some constant flow of information and in order to make these decisions aligned. So the question is, were you successful? And if yes, then what were the cases when you were able to achieve this collaboration between business strategy teams, management consultants, and the architects that provide the capability?
I would say, in general, no. I normally get invited in by the CTO. I often get to meet the management consultants, but that's normally driven by another part of the organization. So my job is normally helping teams to align their choices with the business model, whether it's good or bad. And yeah, I would say sometimes I work with the CTO and I point out why the business model may not work, but I'm not at that level just yet. I'm not a management consultant, unfortunately, or fortunately. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.